How far will people follow an authority against their moral or ethical values? We conducted research to help us answer this question, using two standout experiments. The first experiment was Stanley Milgram's obedience study, and the second experiment was Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison experiment. The Stanford Prison experiment was a psychological study, August 14 to 20, 1971, conducted by Philip Zimbardo to observe the psychological effects of being a prisoner or a prison guard, and how readily these people would conform to their roles in a simulated prison. In this experiment, the prisoners first considered the guards as their common enemy, proved in the experiment in the first rebellion when the prisoners ripped off their caps and identification numbers and locked themselves into their cells. The guards were unsure how to respond at first, but then took action by spraying the prisoners with a fire extinguisher filled with extremely cold carbon dioxide and took away the clothes and mattresses of the prisoners. However, as the experiment progressed, with introductions of psychological tactics such as the good prisoner cell, prisoners turned against each other. In this cell, prisoners were given back hygiene privileges and were allowed to eat special food in the presence of those who had a temporary loss of food privilege. These prisoners were constantly swapped out of good and bad cells, confusing and thus turning the prisoners against each other, providing protection for the guards. At this point, the guards started behaving like real jail guards and treated the prisoners like real troublemakers, being more violent and sadistic than ever before. A particular prisoner became very psychologically disturbed, and the wardens had no choice but to release him. Following the visiting day, the wardens were notified of a rumored mass escape plot, where the released prisoner would help break out the other prisoners in the experiment. The wardens devised a plan to stop the breakout, but it turned out just to be a rumor. Out of their frustration, the guards again began to escalate their violence and punishments. The end result of this experiment was that in a prison environment, when the authority implemented the right strategies, the individual will follow, regardless of their ethical and moral beliefs.
Stanley Milgram's obedience study was a psychological study, as they all were, I guess. The study was conducted from 1961 to 1962, and 3 people participated in it: a tester, a student, and a teacher, all regular students from Yale. The experiment was conducted with the teacher and the tester in one room, and the student in another room, strapped to an electric chair. The student was always chosen, however. It was rigged, and they were always Stanley Milgram's consort, as was the tester. The teacher, however, was a person who was paid $4.50 to show up and had no idea that the student was a consort. The teacher then had to ask the student questions about word pairs, and if the answer was wrong, which normally the consort got the answers wrong on purpose, the teacher would be asked to administer an electric shock, each time increasing in strength, starting at 15 volts to a total of 450 volts. The acting student would scream convincingly each time they received a shock, and if the teacher refused to administer another shock, 4 prods were used by the tester. The first prod was, "Please continue." The second, "The experiment requires that you continue." The third, "It is absolutely essential that you continue." And the fourth prod was, "You have no other choice but to continue." The process was repeated until the teacher would completely refuse to administer the shock. This was repeated with many teachers, many times. The results were that 65% of participants continued to 450 volts. The remaining all administered shocks above 300 volts. In conclusion, ordinary people will follow an authoritarian figure's orders to the extent of killing another human being.
In conclusion, we have found that the general consensus of people will follow an authority to the point of killing someone. In a jail situation, we see that when the authority uses the right strategies, the individuals will follow, in spite of their ethical and moral beliefs.